Welcome to the next episode of Podcast Payoffs. My name is Gord here with my pod partner, Dan Sullivan. And Dan, special guest today is Joe Stolte. He's the co-founder and CEO of daily.ai. We have a partnership with Joe here at Strategic Coach, your newsletter, getthespark.ai. It's called The Spark, but you can get it at getthespark.ai. And we're positively chuffed to have you with us here, Joe. How are you this morning?
I'm outstanding. I don't think I've ever heard the word chuffed used on a podcast before. It's great.
Little throw over to our UK friends there.
So, Joe, we met at Abundance 360. I was instantly intrigued with the artificial intelligence newsletter that essentially designs itself and writes itself and then tests itself and gives you the numbers. And then it's constantly modifying the next issue in order to take advantage of what it's finding out about what the readers like and what the readers don't like. And, which particular topics and which particular authors seem to have the greatest impact on the readership. But give us a little history of this, because you have quite a technological background before you took on this new venture. So can you give us a little bit of your history?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my history is I started my career in management consulting, which was fun to learn, but very quickly became boring. And I thought maybe I can move on to working for a technology company. So I worked at Microsoft for a few years, only to find out that was even more boring. So I decided to leave a pretty comfortable job, and I moved from Seattle, where I was at Microsoft, and I moved down to Venice Beach, California in LA. And I started my first technology company, and you kind of fast forward to now, this is my fifth technology startup. We've had 3 successful exits, 2 spectacular failures, which I learned so much more from than I did from our positive exits. As cliche as that sounds, it's very true. So yeah, for the last 11 years, I've been really focused on, how do you take great ideas and then bring the right people, the right capital, the right resources together, and then you use technology to bring them into the world and, ultimately make it a better place and exchange value. But interestingly enough, with daily.ai, the origin of this business actually goes back to one of my business partners, Evan Pagan. So way back in, must have been 2013, 2014, almost 10 years ago, Evan was in this place where he was really struck by how much change was taking place from a technological perspective. And, he really wanted to keep up with it. He thought that if he could see the way that technologies were colliding, intersecting with each other, that there was really something to be learned about how to exchange value and how to, be an entrepreneur, take resources from lower value to higher value. And so he just had a team kind of manually pulling all this news together so he could just look at it and get a sense of if I read enough of this, can I kind of predict the future a little bit? So that was the origin of the idea, and then when I came along, it wasn't yet really a company and there wasn't a lot going on in terms of commercial exchange. And I had just sold my last company. And I was like, man, this is fantastic. So, I became the CEO and really kind of rebooted everything. We rebranded from Future Scope, built a fantastic team. I'm really proud of the team that we've built. And it's become really fun. We had good success last year in the business, and it was perfect timing. It's just timing is a factor I've never really considered as an entrepreneur. But I think more than anything, it's been really interesting to see how people react to kind of what I'll just call the first true exponential change real time in our lives. Cell phones made a big impact and the internet made a big impact, but in some way, the uptake of those technologies was quite slow compared to what's happening with AI, right? Or at least generative AI. It's been really fun to just watch how people behave, and project their belief systems into what's going to happen in the future. So beyond the business, that's been a really interesting thing to sit back and observe.
Joe, there's the obvious time savings. Everybody knows that AI can save you time because it can do things for you. But in terms of content marketing, not only just the newsletters, but we're thinking about videos and podcasts and whatnot. We cover that a lot on this program. What are some things that people might not be thinking about that AI can assist with, apart from the obvious, which is, okay, it'll save you time. But what else, peel back the layers of the onion a little bit. What else can AI do as a benefit in terms of content marketing that you've seen in your experience?
One thing that I've observed is anytime you're having the efficiency conversation, you should be very mindful of the effectiveness conversation, meaning just because we can do it faster and more efficiently, does that make it more effective?
Or better.
Or better.
Or better, yeah.
Exactly. So we like to focus on outcomes over outputs, because today, what's great about generative AI, which is just one form of AI, is it's making the cost of creating content, it's very quickly becoming zero, which means that anybody can do it, which means we're going to get a lot more content into the world that we're even seeing now. But is it good? Does good meaning like, do people listen to it? Does it help them? Does it bring value back to your business in terms of how they engage? Does it take them into your sales process in a meaningful way if that's the objective of your content? So, one thing that we've observed is that there's basically three forms of truth. There's what a company thinks the market wants. There's what the market says that they want, and there's what they actually do. And those are almost always three different things. So I think what's great about AI, another kind of AI called machine learning, is we can watch all three of those. And we can pay attention to what people actually do versus what they say they're going to do or what we think they're going to do. And then we can double down on that. And so there's two big trends, right, when it comes to content marketing, Gord, that I think are important to pay attention to. The first one is the cost of content is going to zero. So we can literally create any kind of content right now with AI in seconds. This conversation, if we would have had it like 9 months ago, I wouldn't have said that, but we can do text outputs, we can do audio outputs, and we can now do very high quality video outputs. But the question is it going to be very good? And I think the answer to that comes from machine learning, where this is the other trend, is we can start to sub-segment down to the level of one. So marketing historically has been really like a one-to-many conversation, right? It's like instead of where selling was one-to-one, marketing was one-to-many. Well, now we can enter into a world where marketing could be one-to-one. Like, what does Dan want to see today? What does Gord want to see? What does Joe want to see? And then a brand, instead of sending one communication or one piece of content, the near future, are going to be able to send one piece of content where it's totally catered to the individual level. We might record a whole podcast, for example, but then like machine learning will know what Gord wants to hear in that podcast. So it can actually filter sections out and just give him a string of the greatest hits and say, hey, do you want to listen to the whole thing? Do you want just the parts that I think are relevant to you? Same thing with emails, same thing with voice. One thing that I'm seeing that's really interesting is we're now starting to use this tool in our business where, let's say you're going to do a follow-up. In our company, we call this a CEO touch. Like if somebody comes in and books a demo and then they don't necessarily buy or they're kind of on the fence and it's been too long, what we'll do is like, historically, I will have send them a voice note. Hey, Gord, thanks for reaching out. I saw that you booked a demo with us. If there's any other questions I can answer, love to know if you're in, out, or have any questions, and just let you know we're here to support you. Thanks for trusting us. Well, now I can send that whole thing. I can record that voice note and then with a high quality fidelity, just replace Gord with Dan or Joe or Jim or Jane or Sarah, and we can just automate that whole thing. So the question is, do you want to do that? Should you do that? I don't know. But those are the trends I see. Personalization, and then we're going to go from one to many to one, which is fascinating to see how that's going to show up in the world.
One of the things I found intriguing about the prep work that we did to get on board with the AI newsletter was you asked me what my own personal thought leaders were. There were some suggestions like, very famous tech people. And I said, well, they're not even people that I read, so I'm not going to impose this on someone else. But it was more people that I know in Strategic Coach. And then some authors like Peter Zion. I'm a big Peter Zion fan. And so are a lot of my clients. So I know that if we get a Peter Zion podcast or article, we can direct them. But I found that very, very interesting. And the other thing is, it's actually kind of sneaky on your part, Joe, is that as you accumulate authors, you're using the authors who have one newsletter to populate as a guest author on another newsletter.
Put it in the context of what's possible with AI for people's businesses. We, for example, onboarded Robert Kennedy Jr., the presidential candidate, as a customer. This is not an indictment of or endorsement for his policies. He's a customer of ours, right? And he has a fairly substantial list of subscribers, as you would imagine. However, when he came on the platform, just shy of 30% of his subscribers are already on our platform opening content from someone else's newsletter. So what does that mean? That means that we have data on what they open, when they open, the subject lines that are most likely to entice them. So in some ways, we have a little bit of an advantage even over the publisher, because in many cases, they're going to know more about their subscribers than they would as we get more and more subscribers on the platform. That's one thing that we can pass to everybody's benefit, but also we're learning what they're opening and what they're into and the things that are important to them. You guys have amazing content. Like Strategic Coach has outstanding content. So that content shows up in a lot of other people's newsletters. Chris Voss has outstanding content. I mean, that shows up in your newsletter. It shows up in Joe's newsletter, Joe Polish's newsletter. It shows up in lots of people's newsletters. Why? Great content and people click on it. So machine learning is going to grab more of what's working.
Oh, I heard you say on a partner podcast of ours, you brought up Joe Polish moments ago. That's 10X Talk and has been hosting that show with Joe for over a decade now, one of the OGs in the industry. You said that 40% of the content people are pumping out there right now actually serves to push people away from the sale. You hear that and you're like, that's unbelievable. You mean half the stuff I'm putting out there actually drives people away from what I want them to do? So I'd like you to explain that on this show because people may be doing something and they can carry a little nugget away from this to maybe try and improve that.
Wrong message to the wrong person at the wrong time on the wrong channel, in many cases with the wrong offer. Let me step back to create content. Starting from zero, making something great, using your intuition. And what happens is you create what you think is a great piece of content, but you don't actually look at the data. Did people click? Did it flop? What can we learn from this? That data as a feedback loop to improve what's going out into the market to actually give people what they want when they want it on the channels that they want it. And so if you can start to figure out what time, for example, people open content or what time they engage with it, and you can release it and stage it to those people in those times. And that's a huge differentiator. If you know, for example, some of your subscribers or followers or customers are, let's say, below the age of 30 and they don't check their email very often, but they look at their phones all day and check their SMS, and you can deliver it to them over SMS, they probably appreciate that. But when I'm in my inbox and I don't like email and I get the email from you, I'm like, or vice versa. Some people are like, stay out of my text messages. Like, I don't want you to text me. I don't care how valuable it is. That's like for my family and friends and sacred to me. So knowing these things is really important. And you can do that today. You can use pretty sophisticated tools and data science to sort of unpack this stuff. And even if you just make a valiant attempt to just play with things and look at the data, you'll be in a much better place. But, unfortunately, really easy to create mediocre content and spew it all over the place. And unfortunately, that doesn't always have the effect that you want it to have.
We actually want to drive people away in certain situations in the sense that once people find out about us, they call us, and that uses up time. So more and more, for example, the 3 books that we did, Ben Hardy, was a great screener for us because they put in a lot of effort to read the books, listen to the books. So the jump in qualified leads over the last 5 years since the first book went out was really tremendous in terms of our ultimate registration results. Because before, we used to have problems with people coming to the first workshop. As you know, Joe, because you're in the program, we have a very distinct style of coaching. We don't give you answers. We show you how you have your own answers and you can tap into your own answers. Well, some people want to be saved. And then they'll come in and they disrupt the workshop. So more and more, we're keener about just making sure the matchup between them and us is determined before they ever show up.
Yeah, that's really smart. I think the other thing that Coach does really well, publish long form podcast content. It's not the same as a book in terms of a demand on your attention, but a certain kind of quality of prospect or business owner is going to get to the end of a podcast and to get to end of several podcasts. That says something about your attention span, your commitment, kind of what you're digesting in terms of the experience you'll get at Coach and the thinking tools that you'll get. And I like to think about positioning as like, what does your market think about from you before they ever talk to you or buy from you? And so the more that you can help shape that perspective in a way that's reflective of what they're actually going to get when they buy from you, the better, because it increases the trust. But to your point, Dan, it's an amazing filtering mechanism so that the wrong people get on the other side.
Well, it goes back to your one-to-one content. I mean, there's a particular type of person who's looking for what we're offering. Tried as hard as they can to be their own coach, and it hadn't worked. They had reached a ceiling in their own improvement. And then when we tell them how it works, we actually, as much as possible now, I'll be doing a Zoom call, worldwide Zoom call the week after next. But I actually give them a couple strategic coach tools and I take them through it and I say, what's your experience is what strategic coach workshop? This is actually a workshop.
Yep. I love that. I was definitely one of those people, but instead of a year, it was probably like 3 years, listen to every publicly available tool. But it's different when you're in there. It's different when I think there's something really special about is everyone's kind of in there with the collective intention. On my individual basis, like I want to use these tools to improve my thinking. I want to use these tools to have gain the same benefits. And
Hmm.
so I think when you come in with that collective intention and you have the tools and you have the facilitator, then all of a sudden something really magic happens. That doesn't happen when reading Who Not How on the beach in Hawaii or something. It's a whole different level of accountability and experience.
Yeah.
Does that have a name, the lag time between first introduction and the adoption?
I think it's called lag time.
Lag time? I was going to suggest the simmer time or the soup time. What's the soup time? Because you're simmering
Yeah,
soup.
soup time.
What's your soup time
I love
between you
that.
first hear about something to the point where you're actually sending the check?
Yeah.
So there you go. I don't know. I might have just coined something.
I think just from a marketing standpoint is to actually create a compelling future to change what they're doing right now to get to that compelling future. I never dwell on what people are doing wrong or where they're not doing things right. There's a different way of doing this. And would this interest you? If this is the way your days worked, if this is the way your teamwork worked, if this is the way your customer interaction worked, if that's interesting to you, would be you interesting going through a process, kind of not doing what you're doing and doing something new and different.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you're really positioning transformation.
Mhm.
Stephen Covey said something that I love, which is awareness creates its own momentum. So if you can make me aware of what's possible in my life, like that's a beautiful place to invite somebody into a transformation. And I think we miss out on as entrepreneurs is that at some level, everything that we're doing is a possibility for transformation. And it's really just inviting them into that place in their minds. And if you can do that, I think that's like some of the best, if you want to call that marketing in the world, because we're giving people vision and hope and possibility where there was none before. And I think that like if you can give them the vehicle to have the courage to step into that, I don't know if you call that marketing and sales, but influence that you could wield as an entrepreneur.
Joe, what's happened to you since changes of thinking? And you mentioned the one-on-one marketing, but you did other technologies before this because AI, in the way that we're experiencing it, is fairly new on the scene. And what's it done to your own thinking about who you are as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's definitely changed the way I think about the future because the way that my brain works is I'll cast a vision. I don't necessarily dwell on the how, but if I can see a path through, no matter how unrealistic, that it supercharges what I think is possible. And now with machine learning, AI, et cetera, man, there's just so many new capabilities that are emerging that didn't exist before. My imagination sees that and it's like, wow, like what's possible? An early mentor of mine, a guy named Wyatt Woodsmall, he says that possibilities are the enemy of priorities. That just really speaks to focus. And I really love that. I'm good at focusing, but I also have a wild imagination. So I'm constantly seeing new possibilities. So what it's done for me is I'm challenging myself. I think the things that I thought were possible 3 years ago need to be expanded substantially because of the exponential change in technology.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one of them, like, I don't think software is going to exist in like 5 years, maybe. I don't know at the time, but I know it's basically on its last legs. I believe it will be something like, hey, you give me your data, your subscriber list, your payment data, and like your data sources. And then I will be having a chat, voice, or video conversation with a generative AI that will be giving me what I want. Right. So instead of going and looking at the stats, you can just say, hey, how many people open my newsletter? And it'll just tell you, what could I do to make that better? And you can have a conversation. And if you have to go and see the software and the screens, it's a bit like if you go to change your DNS records, for your website, there's a little thing that pops up. It's like, hey, warning, like make sure you know what you're doing or get the technical person before you go in here and screw it up. I think it's going to be more like that. And it'll just be sort of like C3PO. You'll have this like companion that's a different kind of intelligence that's trained on a specific capability and has context and data on a specific part of your business. And the software will be wildly inefficient when we could just talk to it the same way I'm talking to you guys right now. I think that really changes my vision of what's possible in the future. So I don't think in terms of screens anymore and software and a user experience, which I used to fret over. How can we make this really easy for people? I think that's all on its way out. And I just think, great, like how can we help people get better access to better data and better capabilities? And then eventually AI will just be this like C3PO like companion that, a different kind of intelligence that helps you unlock, it does different jobs for you and then helps you stay in your lane, your unique ability.
Yeah, I find my own experience, my number one rule regarding technology is make sure you have a smart person between you and the technology. I have thought a lot about technology for the last 50 years. I started coaching in 74, and I was prompted to do so because I was reading articles about this new thing called the microchip. The name came in around 73, 74, and they were making predictions. Some of the technology writers were making predictions that this was a very different type of technology because it was an invention that could not only be applied to every other existing invention, but it could be applied to itself to create more powerful microchips. Then they made some predictions that large organizations, bureaucratic organizations, were going to have a hard time with this, which has proven very true. But the other thing is it was going to reinforce existing entrepreneurial organizations and individuals, but it was going to create all sorts of new types of entrepreneurial organizations. So the one you're talking about right now, Joe, was not conceivable 50 years ago.
Yeah,
I mean, first of all, they didn't even think in terms of software. I mean, Bill Gates was smart for one reason. You know, if I look at his entire career, I think he's been smart for one thing is that he hoodwinked IBM to think that the future was in hardware. And they gave him basically DOS. They said, well, you can have that. And he said, thank you very much. But even the concept of software. So what you're talking about is the software world got us to the point where we could have this next type of interchange, this new type of relationship with technology,
absolutely.
where we didn't have to conform to some algorithm. We now have an algorithm that we ourselves can continually alter.
That's right. I like to think about it like if you think about internet connectivity, in America, in the 90s, we had the dial-up modems, the big CRT monitors and all that stuff. Well, people, let's say in like South America or Africa, like they didn't get that. They just got cell phones, which is arguably a much, much better technology for many, many use cases. There's people alive right now, possibly my kids who are quite young. They may not really need to interact with software much by the time they're ready to enter the kind of the adult world. It'll just be a totally different world and they'll just leapfrog the entire experience and go into something, brand new. I think after that, though, what's going to get really interesting is when different kinds of intelligences start to inhabit physical form, right? So right now we've got like Elon and a number of people actually making robots, like functionally useful robots, which I think that is so much more of a technical challenge than software or like large language models and AI. I mean, like the human body is just, it's an incredible thing of mechanical wonder. But I think we'll crack that when, I don't know, but it seems inevitable. So when we put this intelligence and things that can move around, then all of a sudden we've got a whole different world of possibility where it's like, maybe we have the first like one person entrepreneurial organization that's $1 trillion business because it's powered by AI and powered by robotics, and it's just got, a bunch of other kinds of intelligences powering.
Probably no free days.
No free days. That's right.
None.
You got to keep the balance going. One of the things, I haven't dealt very deeply, but I really have taken to the app called Perplexity. We have a very good AI coach in the program, Evan Ryan, who is my first client that I'm 50 years older than. I'll be 80 next month, and he's still in his 29th year. And I found that really intriguing. He's in free zone, but he came in and coached our entire company in the fall last year in 2023. He coached us. He had 6 modules. And basically, he has a podcast and we were on. And I said, the problem is not the technology as I can see it, because I've been through a lot of technologies, since the 40s. I said, you have to normalize the experience. That's the biggest problem with any new technology. You have to make the experience of engaging with the technology just something normal. And I've noticed that Perplexity is allowed to do that much quickly. That I have a question, I immediately just go to Perplexity, and then I spend some time on the question so that it gets the right prompts. And it comes back. For example, one of my approaches to human beings when I meet them is the R factor question. And I say, Joe, if we were having this meeting and it was 3 years from today and you're looking back over the 3 years, what has to happen, both personally and professionally, for you to feel happy with your progress? Okay. And if they don't answer the question, there's no future. And if they say, well, it's pretty early for me to be answering that kind of personal question, I said, no, your comment means it's too late. So, yeah, and all I'm looking for is people who will answer the question. I'm just sorting people out because if I don't get a real handle on where strategic coach can fit into this person's future, then we don't want to waste each other's time. So I think it was the third day that I had Perplexity. I said, Perplexity, if we're having this discussion and it's 3 years from today, and you're looking back over the 3 years back to today, what has to happen for you to be satisfied with your progress? Came right back, 5 things, boom, 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 boom. And then I said, what are the 10 biggest obstacles that you're facing right now that have to be solved, that have to be transformed? It gave me all 10 things. And at the end, it said, if we achieve those 5 breakthroughs and we solve these 10 problems, we feel very, very satisfied with our progress, which means I can have a relationship with Perplexity. Now, Google would not answer my question. If I asked that question on Google, Google would say, there is no answer for your question. And if you keep asking it, we're going to notify the FBI.
Mm-hmm. And Dan and I were talking the other day that Perplexity just seems nicer than ChatGPT. GPT is like, I don't know, go pound sand. Whereas Perplexity is just like, not sure if I know the answer to the question, but can I hug you? Give you a peck on the cheek, maybe?
Yeah. I'm just going to give you one more example. I asked the question of all the Americans born in 1944, what percentage of them are still living in 2024? And it came back, it took a little while, and it said, well, I tell you, there's not really good statistics on that. I can't find any real research in this. But just to give you an idea, there was a study that was done in 2021 of people who were born in 1947, and the figure was 63% were still alive. So maybe you can just work backwards from this and sort of get a sense what it was. But what I got was this partner who had just knocked himself out to give me something that would be more useful than just my question. So I just treated it as another team member.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. By the way, we use the R factor questions and then the DOS questions for all job interviews. Like I'm the last interview and that's my interview. So I just ask people those questions and that gives me everything I need to know to understand if they're going to work for us or not, which is awesome. But I love that you asked Perplexity that because it's a beautiful way to start to see how you could have a relationship with the kind of technology, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it gave me a lot of reassurance. I'm looking for players that I can play with, and it was a player that I could play with.
Yeah.
That was my real feel. After we started using the AI newsletter, I sent a triple play thought about where you could go with this that didn't have so much to do with AI and communication. It had to do with marketing. The newsletter would actually tell you about all your marketing strategies, not just the one that you're using on the newsletter.
Yeah.
What was your thought about that?
Well, that conversation, I think it totally changed the strategic roadmap for our business. So we immediately said, well, we're not a newsletter company, right? We're now something else. What is that? But that also planted the seed of thought that helped me draw this conclusion that software is dead, meaning that like it's actually the data and the intelligence and the segmentation and the personalization that are the capabilities that matter the most. And so I think how it changed us is I think newsletters are fantastic. There's still more daily active users on email than there is on any single social media platform. So we love email. We love email newsletters. And we think that we could actually help our customers much more effectively if we go beyond email. So now the next sort of feature set that we're thinking about, and I'll share this as if like what we're thinking about, but I'll share it as a way to like help you think about your thinking in terms of marketing and plus AI, is instead of just newsletters, we're going to start looking at intent. What intent data can I get from Gord or Dan in their relationship to my company? Did you open 6 of the last 10 sends? And have you bought in the widget yet? Well, maybe I should send you an SMS, a WhatsApp message, or an email that's personalized to you and language that would resonate with you, with topics that would resonate with you, and then say, hey, by the way, if you would like to learn if daily.ai is a good fit for you, I'd love to help you book a demo. Are you interested in that? And then they'll say yes or no. And then if they say yes, then fantastic. I give them a link to book a call. And if they say no, well, now I've got an updated bit of intent. They're not ready yet. But how else can I help them then? Mm-hmm. So then I can send them an automated set of information. And this kind of technology exists, let's say, over like an Active Campaign or HubSpot. It's just marketing automation. But what doesn't exist or no one's doing it very well, is that personal nature that's just on the right time based on the right intent for
Yeah.
people. So we're building this intelligence around what strategic coach customers and prospects and subscribers that are on the Spark. Well, we know a great deal about them now. What can we do with that? How can we use that to advance the sales cycle, serve them more deeply, give them stuff that they want? And so it becomes this really beautiful new capability, which is, being able to like see how people are behaving and serve them in more interesting ways, not just deliver their newsletter. So there's lots of takeaways on that triple play because of the way that tool is designed. But that's kind of my synthesis of the big insights that have shaped everything for us since we had that conversation. That was a fork in the road for us, truly.
Yeah.
Let's wrap this one, gents, and then we'll carry on. Joe, you can join us for another one?
Yeah.
So we covered the here and now. In the next episode with Joe, we'll talk a little bit about the future and maybe delve a little bit into some other aspects of AI that we didn't talk about in this one. Joe, where can people find out more about you, reach you, talk to you, poke you?
Yeah. Well, if you want to learn more about our company, you can go to daily.ai.
It's Podcast Payoffs. We cover the intersection of teamwork and technology. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you like, even share it with someone you don't like. You might make a new friend. You might be a hero today for that. And join us on the next one. Joe will be here as well. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. On to the next.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gord.